What a great episode! I sure wish there was a way to go behind the scenes of Walking with Beasts and learn all about the scientific research behind the programme. What the...
Digital viewers can go interactive by pressing the red button now, or use the text service from BBC Art.
Walking with Beasts is a nature documentary from the BBC, or technically a nature docu-fiction from the BBC, which aired at the end of 2001. It was a sequel to the hugely popular Walking with Dinosaurs, and it used groundbreaking special effects to show us the history of life from the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs to modern day. But if you were an early adopter of digital TV, Walking with Beasts was also a milestone in interactive television. The BBC had launched their BBC Eye branding just a week earlier, and Walking with Beasts was its killer app. With Walking with Beasts Interactive, you could re-watch the latest episode all week and access a ton of bonus material while it played. You could change the narrator, read pop-up trivia, and watch 2 different collections of bonus videos. There was so much extra content here that if you wanted to see everything, you'd have to watch the episode 4 times. But to fully appreciate Walking with Beasts Interactive, we need to look at the technology that BBC Eye was working with. The backbone of the BBC's interactive programmes was the text service. For those of you who don't remember or have never used this in the first place, it's an overlay of text, menus, and basic graphics that's transmitted alongside the video and audio information of the channel you're tuned into. It's the modern version of teletext, and you navigate it using the 4 dedicated colour buttons that you have on your TV remote. There were plans to shut down the text service in early 2020, but this was met with a strong enough backlash that the BBC held off. As of 2025, the text service still exists and functions as a relatively obscure accessibility feature. You can use it to read articles from the BBC's website without an internet connection, or, for that matter, any piece of equipment from the new millennium. It wasn't actually called the text service for very long. It was launched as the text service, but quickly renamed BBC Red Button, because you turn it on by pressing the red button. If a programme had interactive content, then a prompt would show up on the top right, which you could get rid of by pressing... I want to say green? No one ever remembered how. And if your tuner and recorder were separate devices, there was no saving you. The Press Red logo was burnt in. If you were out somewhere and set a timer, and thus lacked the capability to press green, you'd know about it when you watch the recording back. For clarity's sake, I'm going to keep referring to the menu functionality as the text service, and refer to the user experience as a whole as BBC Red Button. They're technically just different names for the same thing, but it's a wildly different experience to play an interactive episode with bespoke video compared to, say, reading a news article on your telly instead of your computer. The feature that made proper interactive TV possible was the text service's ability to change channels for you and send information to that new channel's text service so that it knew where you came from and what you were doing. The not-so-secret secret to interactive programmes was the BBC's hidden red button channels. They weren't hidden, but they were buried in the channel list and usually just aired a caption telling you that there wasn't anything on red button right now. They were, technically speaking, just normal television channels, but they weren't supposed to be tuned into like a real TV channel. A bonus video on BBC Red Button was just a button on the text service which took you to the relevant hidden channel. Of course, unless you joined as soon as your bonus video started, you'd tune in somewhere in the middle, but they'd usually account for this with a text service caption telling you to wait for it to loop back to the beginning. Another issue was that different 4x3 displays wouldn't all deal with widescreen content in the same way, so any graphics that go on top of the video could be misaligned. There was no working around this, so they had to avoid the problem entirely and make all interactive content in 4x3, even when the main program it was tying into was in widescreen. They even had to compromise to the point where the BBC Eye logo looks kinda squashed in both formats to avoid it looking really squashed in either one. 3 squares in a circle. They could not have picked a more awkward logo if they'd tried. The regular version of Walking with Beasts is in widescreen, So the interactive version places a menu where the black bars would be. It's a fair solution, but some viewers did complain that the interactive version wasn't in full screen. The alternative narration is a really cool feature, but technically speaking, isn't particularly noteworthy if you're familiar with broadcast TV standards. Most of the big channels have two audio tracks normally for audio description. That being said, having a custom menu makes it much more intuitive as a user if you're not familiar with that feature, and I imagine that most viewers weren't. The two collections of bonus videos were simply an additional two of those semi-hidden red button channels. They were presented with this picture-in-picture effect, so you may have assumed that you were tuned into two channels at once, but that was just how they chose to edit it. Even the pop-up facts took up their own red button channel, meaning that there were 3 alternative views to choose from in addition to the main feature. So under the bonnet, Walking with Beasts Interactive was simply 4 different TV channels playing their own version of the same Walking with Beasts episode at the same time, with a text service menu on top to change channels and audio tracks on your behalf. Quite a mean feat logistically, but nothing too crazy from a technical standpoint. Terrestrial analog viewers only got 2 BBC channels in total, while digital satellite viewers got 4 channels playing the same episode of Walking with Beasts on a loop for the whole week. The 2 picture-in-picture tracks, Evidence and Making Of, are divided into short segments, and the other 2 streams let you know when a new picture-in-picture segment is about to start. In turn, every picture-in-picture segment ends with the narrator encouraging you to hop back onto the main feature. There's only 1 audio track for the bonus videos, so if you watch a picture-in-picture stream between the videos, then the episode will just continue to play without any narration at all.
Took an awful lot of...
Of course, there's no technical reason why these videos have to be picture-in-picture, but it's probably for the best that everyone watching realised that they were missing the main episode while they were watching the extras. In fact, they probably didn't need to sync the videos with the episode at all. They could have just been full-screen loops to watch after the episode had ended. But that would only be convenient for people who wanted to watch absolutely everything. I suppose the main benefit of making this stuff interactive was that you could pick and choose. Watch whatever extras take your fancy, spend as much time as you want to, and don't let Walking with Beasts overstay its welcome. It's sort of like how DVD extras tend to be edited into these bite-sized segments when, often, they too could have been presented as a single long-form video. The Red Button team basically took the functionality of a DVD's bonus features menu and made it work on a linear TV broadcast. It was an ambitious early step into interactive TV. Unfortunately, it was too ambitious. If you were watching through cable TV or the terrestrial service ITV Digital, you got a more limited version of Walking with Beasts Interactive. You had the pop-up trivia, which you didn't get on analog, so that must have been nice. No alternative narrators or bonus videos though. In May of 2002, just a few months after Walking with Beasts aired, ITV Digital died. But the good news was that its terrestrial broadcasts were taken over by a new platform, Freeview, and for the first time you could watch the BBC's digital channels without a subscription. It was presumably for this reason that the BBC began designing their interactive content to be compatible with terrestrial TV's limitation of just 3 red button channels. Or, effectively, 2 red button channels, because one of the 3 would be permanently taken up by an interactive news service called the News Multiscreen. The BBC's next foray into interactive prehistoric TV was Walking with Cavemen in March 2003. Although Tim Haynes wasn't involved and it was a totally different production team to the other Walking With series. In fact, I would argue that it was just the BBC using a well-known brand name and doesn't count as a real entry into the Walking With saga, but that's a whole other video. Walking with Cavemen Interactive allowed you to turn on fact files during the episode and then watch a 10-minute bonus video once immediately after it was finished. I'm sure that some satellite viewers were disappointed by how stripped down this was, but this new stripped down format made the bonus videos accessible to a lot of people who would never have gotten to see them otherwise, myself included. BBC Red Button would continue to offer games and interactive programs for several more years using a format that they called the two-stream quiz. Typically, this would bounce you between two red button channels, one airing the correct path and the other airing the incorrect path. Both paths would ask you a question at the same time, and you answered through a text service menu which took you to the relevant channel.
Well, hey! Right choice! Pig's ear, dog's dinner. You've left the victims frozen in time.
The two games that stuck in my memory were tied to Doctor Who and, in keeping with the natural history theme, the truth about killer dinosaurs. In Attack of the Grask, you, the faithful viewer, are recruited by the Doctor himself to defeat an alien menace. While some of the puzzles could have been presented as simple graphics, there were others where video was instrumental, like this section where the player is tasked with finding the shape-shifting Grask by toggling between two different camera feeds of the same event. To solve the baryonyx mystery, viewers had to choose which paleontological evidence they wanted to see, and were then quizzed on their findings. As a viewer, you were now using the same science and deductions that were covered in the main programme for yourself. I mean, you weren't, it was make-believe, but you know, it was fun. It may not have been as elaborate as it was on satellite, but this stuff was still really impressive for what it was. I mean, you could play actual FMV games on a bog standard TV receiver. But it didn't last, and ironically it was the closure of analog television that marked the end of digital TV's most elaborate perk. The digital switchover happened in part so that terrestrial high-definition broadcasts could use some of the bandwidth that analog TV used to take up, but apparently they still needed a bit more space, and in October 2009, 2 of the 3 red button channels on Freeview were permanently shut down. The red button programs could still change audio tracks and overlay menus over the video, but the 2-stream quiz was gone for good on all platforms. Because red button videos would now loop for less time, the red button channel started to appear in TV guides, and it functioned even more like a regular channel. Of course, the BBC had a well-established streaming service by this point, so a lot of this content could be viewed online with much greater convenience, and the red button was starting to feel antiquated. The red button channel was finally shut down in... Still there. For reasons that I can only speculate, Episode 2 was ported to DVD and distributed internally within the BBC, and it looks like it's a pretty accurate port as well. That's where all of my footage has come from. But if this thing didn't exist, all I'd have to go off would be old adverts and forum posts.
So now, a major new BBC One series, From a Time the World Forgot, Walking with Beasts. If you're a digital viewer, you can now go interactive by using the text service from BBC i. Press the blue menu button.
They really hyped up the interactive version at the time. There were reminders at the beginning and end of every episode, but now it's almost completely forgotten. Bits and pieces from the bonus videos did crop up in other places, but the overwhelming majority of the interactive content is now completely inaccessible. And as far as I'm aware, none of the BBC's other interactive programmes got DVD ports in the first place. The Doctor Who and Killer Dinosaurs games were ported to Flash and available on the BBC's website for years, but of course, those Flash versions are now defunct too. It's weird to think of a prime-time BBC series from after the turn of the millennium as being ephemeral, but this was. I missed the interactive version of Walking with Beasts when it was on, and I don't ever expect to see the other 5 episodes. Interactive TV was all over the BBC for a few short years, and then it quietly faded away.